Ordinary people. Chapter 1. Farringdon, November. I had been in London for 3 days before I started to feel like myself again. Which is to say, before I stopped checking my phone every 4 minutes to see how the new series was doing. 37,000 likes on the first image. 42 on the second. A gallery in Seoul had emailed. My agent had forwarded it with a single exclamation mark, which from Isabel meant she was very pleased and trying not to show it. My name is Raphael Voss. I am 29 years old. I shoot street photography on a Leica M11, which cost more than my first car, and which I carry the way some people carry anxiety, always present. Always slightly too heavy. Last year Foam magazine called me one of the 10 most exciting young documentary photographers working today, which is the kind of sentence that reads well in a bio and sits strangely in the actual body, like wearing a coat that fits perfectly on paper. I was in Farringdon because I liked the light there in November. Not the famous London light, the grey, perpetual, softening light that makes everything look like a period film, but specifically the light on Cocross Street, around 3:30, when the sun drops low enough to come in at a sideways angle under the overpass and turn the pavement copper for about 20 minutes. I had shot it before. I wanted to shoot it again. This is what photographers do, we go back to the same places and try to get it more right. He was standing outside a betting shop. That is not unusual in itself. Men stand outside betting shops throughout London, usually with the specific posture of people who have recently made a decision they are not entirely at peace with. But this man was not looking at the door of the betting shop. He was looking across the street at a woman struggling with an umbrella in the wind. The umbrella had inverted, the spokes bent outward like a dark flower, opening the wrong way, and the woman was fighting it with both hands and losing with great dignity. And his camera was already up. Not a phone, a camera. A film camera, by the look of it, black body. No screen on the back, a lens that had the specific patina of something handled every day for years. He shot once, wound the advance lever with his thumb. That small mechanical gesture, unhurried. Practiced and shot again. The woman got the umbrella under control. She straightened it, shook water from her coat, and walked on without looking up. The moment was over. The man lowered his camera and looked at nothing for a second, in the way photographers do when they're deciding whether they got it. I watched him the way I watch most things, through the lens of what I would do differently. He was old, late 70s, perhaps, possibly older. The kind of age that settles into a person's posture like sediment. He wore a dark wax jacket that had gone stiff with weathering. His shoes were brown leather, well kept. His hair was white and cut short with the no-nonsense precision of a man who has been to the same barber for 30 years and sees no reason to revise the arrangement. He put the camera down and went back to waiting. The late light came and went on the pavement. He didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps he noticed and had decided the umbrella woman was the better image. He might have been right. I should have walked on. I had my own frames to find. But I stood there for another minute, watching him watch the street. And I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could account for. Curious. Not professionally curious, not the curator's curiosity that asks what is this worth, and to whom, but the older, simpler kind. The kind that just wants to know. I crossed the street. Chapter 2. Martin. His name was Martin-esque. He told me this the way men of a certain generation give their names. Surname second, with a slight formality. As if we were being introduced at a function. He shook my hand with a grip that was firmer than I expected. And looked at my Leica with the expression of a man reading a sentence he finds mostly accurate. Digital, he said. Yes. M series. M11. He nodded slowly, as if filing this away. Good body. They softened the shutter on the later ones. I asked what he was shooting. He showed me without ceremony, held up the camera, a Leica M6. Which I recognized because I had used one briefly in my second year at college. Before the economics of film processing became impossible to justify. His was older than the one I'd used. The black paint had worn through to silver at the corners. And along the top plate, where decades of hands had smoothed it down. It was the most handled object I had seen in years. Film, I said, which was obvious. But he seemed to find it a reasonable observation. Tri-X, mostly. Some HP5 when the light is low. I've been using the same 2 films for 40 years. And I see no reason to diversify. He said this with the dry certainty of a man who has thought about it. And arrived at his position through evidence rather than stubbornness. Though the line between those two things gets harder to see after 40 years. I asked if I could see his shots. He looked at me for a moment, not suspiciously, exactly. But measuring, and said, "They're not digital. There's nothing to show you here." I know. I meant, do you have prints? A portfolio? Something shifted in his face. Not quite amusement, not quite wariness. I have prints, he said. Have you shown them? Galleries, exhibitions? He looked back at the street. A man in a high-vis jacket was arguing with someone on his phone. Gesturing with his free hand at nothing. Martin's camera came up, almost on its own. And he shot once before. The argument resolved itself into the man just walking away. No, he said, lowering the camera. I haven't shown them. I waited for more. There wasn't more. He had the quality that I associate with people who have been alone a great deal. The ability to let a silence be a complete sentence. I asked if he'd like to get a coffee. He considered this for a moment with the thoroughness he seemed to give all decisions. Then said, "There's a place on Turnmill Street. They don't play music." He said this as though it were the primary qualification. We walked. He moved slowly but not unsteadily, with a kind of deliberate economy. The way people move when they've stopped being in a hurry. And found it suits them. Every few steps his attention would catch on something, a shadow, a person's gait, the geometry of a shop front, and I could see him making the small, unconscious calculation worth stopping for, or not. Mostly not. A few times yes. The camera came up and went down again in one motion, like breathing. How long have you been shooting here? I asked. Here specifically? Since about 1987. This area changed enormously. Then it changed back, more or less. He paused at a corner, glanced down an alley, where the low sun was doing something extraordinary to a stack of pallets. He shot it without breaking stride. London always changes back. The cafe on Turnmill Street was small and old and smelled of ground coffee. And a particular kind of damp that suggested it had been there since before insulation was a priority. Martin ordered tea. He was that kind of man. Chapter 3. The flat on Sekforde Street. He invited me to his flat on my third visit. I want to be precise about this. Third visit because the visits were not planned. I kept coming back to Farringdon, ostensibly for the light. And I kept finding him on Crowcross Street or near the market on Charterhouse. Or once on a side street I didn't know the name of, standing very still outside a dry cleaner's watching nothing in particular, with the patience of a man who knows something is coming. The flat was on the second floor of a narrow Victorian terrace. The hallway smelled of developer chemicals and old paper, and something that might have been linseed oil. He led me through without apology or self-consciousness. The way people move through spaces they have inhabited long enough to stop seeing. Then he opened a door at the end of the hall. I stood in the doorway for a moment and did not go in. The room had been a bedroom. Once there was still a single bed against one wall. Narrow and tightly made, but it was the only concession to its original purpose. Every other surface was given over to photographs. Prints, contact sheets, negative sleeves. Manila envelopes stacked in. Columns that had developed their own geological logic. Shelves along two walls, floor to ceiling. Held box after box labeled in a handwriting I was coming to recognize a year. A location, sometimes just a single word. Market. Rain. Stations. One box said simply people, which I found either very obvious or very precise. Prints were pinned to a corkboard that covered most of one wall. Black and white, all of them. 8 by 10s, some larger. I walked toward them slowly, the way you approach something in a museum. That the lighting tells you is significant. A woman on a bus shot through the window. Her forehead resting against the glass, her eyes closed, rain tracks on the pane. Making a second, watery image of her face across hers. 2 men outside a pub, mid-argument, one of them laughing despite himself. The other trying to hold on to his grievance against the pull of the laugh. A child running towards something out of frame, with her whole body committed, arms behind her. The blur of her legs sharp enough to feel fast. A man sitting alone at a table in what looked like a canteen. Eating methodically, not reading. Not looking at a phone. Just eating, just present in the absolute ordinary act of feeding himself. And something in the frame. Some quality of the light or the composition, or the precise angle of his solitude, made it feel like a painting. Made it feel like a question. I turned to Martin. He was standing in the doorway watching me look, with his arms folded and his expression carefully neutral. How many? I said. Prints? Perhaps 4,000. Negatives considerably more. I stopped counting negatives some time ago. How far back? 1983. He said it simply. I was 31. I'd just bought the M6. I walked out of the shop and photographed a man eating a sandwich on the steps of the National Portrait Gallery. A pause. He looked extremely dissatisfied with the sandwich. It seemed important to record. I looked back at the wall. 40 years of London. 40 years of ordinary people being themselves in public, unguarded. Unperforming because nobody performs for a man with a film camera that makes no sound. Standing still near a wall. Waiting. Nobody notices him. I was beginning to understand, the whole method. No one has seen these, I said. It wasn't a question. My wife saw them. She died in 2014. A beat. My optician has been here. He expressed polite interest. I turned around fully to look at him. Martin. Yes. Some of these are extraordinary. This is 40 years of work. He looked at the prints on the wall with the expression of someone hearing a description of a place they know very well from a person who has just arrived there. Neither agreement nor disagreement, just recognition. Yes, he said, I know. Why have you never shown them? He unfolded his arms, picked up a contact sheet from the nearest shelf, looked at it, set it down again. I didn't take them to show them, he said. I took them because the street was there and something was happening and I had a camera. The taking was the point. But I'm aware that's an unusual position, he said. Not defensively, just acknowledging it. Most people want an audience. I never minded not having one. I stayed for 2 hours. He made tea strong, with no ceremony, and left me alone with the prints and the boxes, which I understood to be a significant gesture even if he offered it without apparent significance. I went through 3 boxes. 1991, 1992, 1998. I kept finding frames that stopped me cold, the kind of image that takes a second to understand and then you can't unsee it. The kind of image that makes you feel that someone was paying attention at a moment when attention was the most valuable possible response. I photographed none of them. I didn't ask if I could and I didn't try. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't precisely articulate, like transcribing a conversation that was still going on. When I left, Martin was back in the doorway with his jacket on, camera around his neck. Going out again? I asked. The light's good until 4, he said. After that it's just dark. He said it completely without self-pity. It was a weather report. Chapter 4. What he saw. I came back on a Saturday with coffee from the place on Turnmill Street too, because I had started to understand that arriving with something was the correct approach with Martin, not as a transaction but as a kind of grammar. A signal that said I have thought about coming here, I did not just wander in. He was in the print room when I arrived, standing at a small table with a loupe, examining a contact sheet. He didn't look up when I set the coffee down, but he said, "Thank you," in a tone that meant it. I sat in the chair that had come to feel like mine, wooden, slightly too low, positioned in the corner where you could see the whole corkboard at once, and looked at the wall while he worked. He had changed some of the prints since my last visit. Taken a few down, added others. The wall was a living thing, apparently. A conversation he was having with himself. I asked him what it was like in the early days, shooting film in London in 1983. He set down the loupe, picked up the coffee, thought about it with the seriousness he brought to every question, which I had come to appreciate because most people answer before they've finished thinking. Invisible, he said, that was the main thing. People didn't look at you. A man with a camera was unremarkable. Now, he gestured vaguely at my Leica on the table between us. Now everyone is a photographer. Everyone is recording everything, so a camera is an aggressive object. People notice it, they look at you. Does that change what you shoot? It changes what they give you. People used to simply be in the street. Now they perform being in the street. He drank his coffee. Even when they think they're not performing, there's a new awareness. The self-consciousness has gone all the way down. It's very hard to photograph someone who has spent their life being photographed. I had thought about this. I had written about it, even in an artist statement that my agent had called thoughtful, and which a reviewer had called self-congratulatory, which might both have been accurate. Do you still find it? I asked. The unguarded moment? Occasionally. Old people, mostly. They grew up before the camera was something you had to manage. They still just exist in front of it. He said this without irony. Children under about 3, people in grief, people very focused on something else, their work, a conversation that matters to them. When the attention is entirely elsewhere, you get the face without the mask. Is that what you're looking for? The face without the mask? He considered this for a while. Outside, rain had started, a thin, persistent rain that was making the window run in long, wavering lines. I'm looking for evidence, he said finally. That people are real, that their lives are happening. He picked up the loop again, looked at the contact sheet. It sounds simple. It isn't, particularly. I thought about my own work. The series that Foam had published, Commuters in Tokyo, shot on a 35mm in the train stations. I had spent 3 weeks there, burning through rolls of film, and the images that came out best were the ones I hadn't planned. A man asleep against the window of a platform bench, his mouth slightly open, his hands folded in his lap with a precise and unconscious dignity. A woman reading a letter on a train, her face doing something private and entire that I'd barely had time to catch. I had thought of them as my best work. I still did. The archive, I said. Would you ever consider letting someone see it? Properly. A gallery, or, you've mentioned this before, he said. I know. And the answer is still, he paused. Set the contact sheet down. Looked at the wall for a long moment. I'm not sure what the answer is. That was different from before. Before, the answer had been a silence that meant no. This was a different silence. The person who should show them, he said slowly, should understand what they are. Not what they're worth. What they are. What are they? He looked at me over the rim of the coffee cup. There was something in his face that I couldn't quite read, something that was maybe amusement and maybe assessment and maybe something older than either. A record, he said, of people who didn't know they were being kept. We sat with that for a while. The rain came harder against the window. Somewhere in the flat a radiator made a sound like someone clearing their throat politely in another room. I picked up my camera. I looked at Martin across the table, the white hair, the careful hands. The expression of a man who has spent 40 years paying attention to other people. And has, in the process, become someone whose face holds the residue of all of it, like a room that has had many fires. Can I? I said. He looked at the camera. Then at me. Yes, he said. I shot once. I didn't look at the screen. I set the camera down. Was it in focus? He asked. I think so. Good. I'm not photogenic enough to justify blurry. Chapter 5. Silver and Grain. The show opened on a Thursday evening in February, in a gallery in Shoreditch that Isabel had found. And that Martin had agreed to after 3 separate conversations. Each one requiring me to answer the same questions in slightly different orders. Did I understand the prints were not for sale? Did I understand the negatives remained with him? Did I understand that he would not be giving interviews? Did I understand that the title was not negotiable? I understood all of these things. The title was Ordinary People. Martin had suggested it without apparent awareness that it was also the name of a film, and when I mentioned this, he said he hadn't seen it and didn't intend to let that affect anything. There were 62 prints. I had selected them over 4 Saturdays in the flat on Sekforde Street. Working through the boxes in chronological order while Martin made tea at intervals. and occasionally came to stand beside me and say nothing or say, very briefly, things like, "That one's technically imperfect," meaning it was a better image than most technically perfect things I'd ever seen. Or, "She was waiting for someone who didn't come," which he said about a woman in a 1994 print, standing on a corner in Islington, and which he said with complete simplicity, as if it were a caption. I asked him once how he knew. "I stayed," he said. "After I shot. I always stayed a while. I had not known this. I thought about it for a long time afterward." The prints were mounted simply, white borders, no frames marked in specification. The chronology ran counterclockwise around the gallery. So you entered in 1983 and followed the walls through 4 decades until you arrived, at the end, at a cluster of recent images. Cocross Street in all weathers, the market, the overpass. The same geography, 40 years later, the light and the people changed and in some essential way unchanged. I stood near the entrance on the opening night and watched people come in. There is a particular thing that happens when people encounter photography that asks something of them. A slowing, a leaning in, the social chatter of an opening night dropping away as an image catches and holds. I had seen it before at other shows, including my own. But there was something different here, some quality of the work itself that created a specific and unusual quiet. People stood in front of these prints for a long time. Longer than the standard gallery pause. A woman in her 50s stopped in front of the 1997 print of 2 men sharing an umbrella outside a tube station, not a romantic image. Not staged looking at all, just 2 strangers caught in the rain making a pragmatic arrangement. And she stood there for so long that the person she'd come with came to find her. An older man stood in front of the canteen image, the man eating alone, present and entire in his solitude, and did not move for several minutes. When he stepped back, his face was arranged very carefully. Martin was standing near the back of the gallery with a glass of white wine he had not drunk. He was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before, dark, well cut, the kind of jacket you have cleaned for an occasion. His M6 was not around his neck, which was the most formal thing about him. He was watching the people watch the photographs with the look of a man observing something from a greater distance than the room allowed. I went to stand beside him. "Well," I said. "Yes," he said. A gallery assistant came by and offered to refill his wine. He looked at his untouched glass, appeared to perform a brief calculation, and said, "I seem to have fallen behind." "Yes, thank you." We stood for a while. Across the room, a young woman 20, perhaps, maybe younger, with the specific self-consciousness of art students who are trying to decide what to think, stood in front of the 2006 image of a child running toward the frame edge. She was leaning forward slightly, her weight on her front foot, as if she might run after the child herself. "She gets it," Martin said quietly. "How do you know?" "The posture," he said. "You can tell." I looked at him. "That's what you do, isn't it?" I said. "Read the posture. Bodies are more honest than faces," he said. "Faces know they're being watched. Bodies mostly forget." I filed this away. I file most things, Martin says, away, in the part of my brain where the genuinely useful information lives, alongside f-stop relationships and the 17 ways light behaves near water. I have been doing this since Farringdon in November, and the folder is getting full. Around 10 o'clock, when the crowd had thinned to a comfortable density, a woman from the gallery came to tell Martin that several people had asked about acquiring prints. and that 2 collectors had expressed serious interest in the archive. He listened to her with the polite attention of someone hearing a weather forecast for a country they will not be visiting. "The prints aren't for sale," he said. I mentioned this. "Of course. I just thought. The archive also isn't for sale." A pause. "I appreciate the interest. I genuinely do. But no." She thanked him and retreated. Martin looked at his wine. "You're not tempted?" I asked. "Not even a little? By money?" "By legacy. Permanence. Knowing it's somewhere it'll be looked after." He thought about this for a moment. The gallery was quieter now, the light lower, the remaining visitors moving slowly through the chronology, decades of ordinary London arranged around them like a continuous present tense. "The negatives are in archival sleeves in a temperature-controlled cabinet," he said. "I bought the cabinet in 1999. It cost more than I wanted to spend and I have never regretted it." He drank some wine. "They'll outlast me perfectly well. After that, they can look after themselves." "And if no one finds them?" He looked at me sideways. "Someone found them," he said. "You were standing on Cocross Street watching me shoot an umbrella. You came over." A pause. "I saw you hesitate. Most people don't come over." I hadn't known he'd seen me hesitate. "Why did you think I did?" I asked. "Because you were curious in the right way," he said. "Not about me specifically. About what I was doing. There's a difference." He set down his wine glass, which was now finally empty. "Most photographers your age look at someone my age with a camera and see a story about obsolescence. A man replaced by smartphones. That's a valid story. It's just not the interesting one." "What's the interesting one?" He looked at the wall beside us. A 1989 print, a man in a phone box, a red phone box. Gone now. All of them gone, talking, his back to the street. His free hand pressed against the glass as if to steady himself. The body's honesty. Something in the call that required that support. 40 years of paying attention, Martin said. That's the interesting one. We stood there for a while longer, in the February gallery, in the quiet that the photographs had made. Outside, London was doing what it always does, continuing. Someone somewhere was standing on a wet pavement doing something ordinary and unremarkable and entirely irreplaceable. And no one was watching, and it was happening anyway. I thought about Cocross Street. The copper light under the overpass. A woman fighting her umbrella with great dignity, and a man already raising his camera before the thought had fully formed. I thought I should get back out there. I thought, but not yet. Martin reached into his jacket pocket. For a moment I thought he was going to produce the M6. But instead he brought out a small notebook, the kind you can buy at any stationer's, cheap. The pages slightly warped from being carried, and held it out to me. "Light notes," he said. "Locations. Times of year. When the good windows catch it." He paused. "I've been keeping this since about 1988. There's a second one in the cabinet." I took it carefully. It was lighter than it looked. "Why are you giving me this?" "I'm not giving it to you," he said. "I want it back. But you can borrow it. Copy what's useful." He picked up his coat from the chair behind him. Put it on with the deliberate economy of his movements. The careful conservation of effort that I had come to read not as age, but as a kind of editing, the removal of everything unnecessary, down to the essential gesture. "I'm going to walk home," he said. "The long way." "It's February," I said. "It's cold." "Yes," he said, already moving toward the door. "But the light does something interesting to the puddles around 10 o'clock. After rain, he glanced back at me once. You should come sometime. The gallery door opened and closed. I stood with the notebook in my hands, in the middle of 62 prints, 40 years of ordinary people being quietly, irreducibly themselves. Outside, somewhere on a wet London street, Martin was already looking.